you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rice, first, thank you for your service to this nation and this president. I think it can fairly be described by all, whether they agree with you or not, on various issues as devoted to the interests of the president and the country, and all Americans, I believe, appreciate that. Thank you also for finally making it here. I know there was a struggle over constitutional principles. I don't think your appearance today signals any retreat by the president from the notion that the Congress should not be allowed to hail presidential aides down to the Capitol and question them. We are not the Congress. We are not a congressional committee. That's why you gave us the PDBs. And so we appreciate your appearance, and we appreciate the decision of the president to allow you to appear to not just answer our questions, because you've done that for 5 hours in private, but to answer the questions of Americans who are watching you today. I'm going to go through my questions, some of which have been tossed out because my brothers and sisters asked them before me, as quickly as I can, because we have to depart. And I would appreciate it if you would go through your answers as quickly as you could, but be fair to yourself. I don't believe in beating dead horses, but there's a bunch of lame ones running around here today. Let's see if we can't finally push them out the door. Please describe to us your relationship with Dick Clark, because I think that bears on the context of this. Well, let's just take the first question. He said he gave you a plan. You said he didn't give you a plan. It's clear that what he did give you was a memo that had attached to it not only the didnt plan, or whatever you want to describe didnt as, but a December 2000 strategy paper. Was this something that you were supposed to act on, or was this a compilation of what had been pending at the time the Clinton administration had left office but had not been acted on? Or was this something he tried to get acted on by the Clinton administration and they didn't act on it? What was it? How did he describe it to you? What did you understand it to be?
What I understood it to be was a series of decisions, near-term decisions that were pending from the Clinton administration, things like whether to arm the Uzbeks, I'm sorry, whether to give further counterterrorism support to the Uzbeks, whether to arm the Northern Alliance, a whole set of specific issues that needed decision, and we made those decisions prior to the strategy being developed. He also had attached the didnt plan, which is my understanding was developed in 1998, never adopted, and in fact had some ideas. I said, Dick, take the ideas that you've put in this think piece, take the ideas that were there in the didnt plan, put it together into a strategy not to roll back al-Qaeda, which had been the goal of the Clinton, of what Dick Clark wrote to us, but rather to eliminate this threat. And he was to put that strategy together. But by no means did he ask me to act on a plan. He gave us a series of ideas. We acted on those, and then he gave me some papers that had a number of ideas, more questions than answers, about how we might get better cooperation, for instance, from Pakistan. We took those ideas, we gave him the opportunity to write a comprehensive strategy.
I'd like to follow up on one of Commissioner Romer's questions. The principals meetings. With all due respect to the principals, cabinet officers of the President of the United States, Senate confirmed. The notion that when principals gather, the heavens open and the truth pours forth is, to borrow the phrase of one of my fellow commissioners, a little bit of hooey, I think. Isn't it a fact that when principals gather in principals meeting, they bring their staffs with them? Don't they line the walls? Don't they talk to each other? Doesn't the staff speak up?
Absolutely. Well, actually, when you have principals meetings, they really sometimes are to tell, for the principals to say what their staffs have said.
Right.
Have told them to say. I just have to say, we may simply disagree on this. With some of the commissioners, I do not believe that there was a lack of high-level attention. The President was paying attention to this. How much higher level can you get? The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General and the line officers are responsible for responding to the information that they were given, and they were responding. The problem is that the United States was effectively blind to what was about to happen into it, and you cannot depend on the chance that some principal might find out something in order to prevent an attack. That's why the structural changes that are being talked about here are so important.
What you say in your statement before us today on page 2 reminds me that terrorism had a different face in the 20th century than it does today. And I just want to be sure I understand the attitude of the Bush administration, because you reference the Lusitania and the Nazis and all these state-sponsored terrorist activities, when we know today that the real threat is from either rogue states, Iran, North Korea, or from stateless terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas. Does the Bush administration get this difference?
We certainly understand fully that there are groups, networks that are operating out there. The only thing I would say is that they are much more effective when they can count on a state either to sponsor them or to protect them or to acquiesce in their activities. That's why the policy that we developed was so insistent on sanctuaries being taken away from them. You do have to take away their territory. When they can get states to cooperate with them, or when they can get states to acquiesce in their being on their territory, they're much more effective.
The coal. Why didn't the Bush administration respond to the coal?
I think Secretary Rumsfeld has perhaps said it best. We really thought that the coal incident was passed, that you didn't want to respond tit for tat. As I've said, there is strategic response and there's tactical response, and just responding to another attack in an insufficient way, we thought would actually probably embolden the terrorists. They'd been emboldened by everything else that had been done to them, and that the best course was to look ahead to a more aggressive strategy against them. I still believe to this day that the Al-Qaeda were prepared for a response to the coal, and that, as some of the intelligence suggested, bin Laden was intending to show that he'd yet survived another one, and that it might have been counterproductive.
I've got to say that answer bothers me a little bit because of where it logically leads, and that is, and I don't like what-if questions, but this is a what-if question. What if in March of 2001, under your administration, Al-Qaeda had blown up another U.S. destroyer? What would you have done, and what would that have been tit for tat?
I don't know what we would have done, but I do think that we were moving to a different concept that said that you had to hold at risk what they cared about, not just try and punish them, not just try to go after bin Laden. I would like to think that we might have come to an effective response. I think that in the context of war, when you're at war with somebody, it's not an issue of every battle or every skirmish. It's an issue of, can you do strategic damage to this organization? And we were thinking much more along the lines of strategic damage.
Well, I'm going to sound like my brother Kerry, which terrifies me somewhat, but blowing up our destroyers is an act of war against us, is it not? I mean, how long would that have to go on before we would respond with an act of war?
We'd had several acts of war committed against us, and I think we believed that responding kind of tit for tat, probably with inadequate military options, because for all the plans that might have been looked at by the Pentagon or on the shelf, they were not connected to a political policy that was going to change the circumstances of Al-Qaeda in Taliban and the Taliban, and therefore the relationship to Pakistan. Look, it can be debated as to whether or not one should have responded to the coal. I think that we really believed that an inadequate response was simply going to embolden them, and I think you've heard that from Secretary Rumsfeld as well, and I believe we felt very strongly that way.
I'll tell you what I find remarkable. One word that hasn't been mentioned once today, yet we've talked about structural changes to the FBI and the CIA and cooperation and Congress. The Congress has to change the structure of the FBI. The Congress has to appropriate funds to fight terrorism. Where was the Congress?
Well, I think that when I made the comment that the country was not on war footing, that didn't just mean the executive branch was not on war footing. The fact is that many of the big changes that quite frankly, again, we were not going to be able to make in 233 days. Some of those big changes do require congressional action. The Congress cooperated after September 11th with the President to come up with the Patriot Act, which does give to the FBI and the CIA and other intelligence agencies the kind of ability, legal ability, to share between them that was simply not there before. You cannot depend on the chance that something might fall out of a tree. You cannot depend on the chance that a very good customs agent who's doing her job with her colleagues out in the state of Washington is going to catch somebody coming across the border of the United States with bomb-making materials to be the incident that leads you to be able to respond adequately. This is hard because, again, we have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right once. But the structural changes that we've made since 9/11 and the structural changes that we may have to continue to make give us a better chance and in that fight against the terrorists.
I read this week an interview in Newsweek with your predecessor, Mr. Brzezinski. He seemed to be saying that there is a danger that we can obsess about al-Qaeda and lose sight of equal dangers. For example, the rise of a nuclear state, Iran, in the Middle East, and their apparent connection to Hezbollah and Hamas, which may forecast even more bitter fighting, as we're now learning in Iraq, or the ability of Hezbollah or Hamas to attack us on our soil within the United States in the same way al-Qaeda did. Are we keeping an eye on that?
We are keeping an eye and working actively with the international community on Iran and their nuclear ambitions. I think that one thing that the global war on terrorism has allowed us to do is to not just focus on al-Qaeda, because we have enlisted countries around the world saying that terrorism is terrorism is terrorism. In other words, you can't fight al-Qaeda and hug Hezbollah or hug Hamas. That we've actually started to delegitimize terrorism in a way that it was not before. We don't make a distinction between different kinds of terrorism, and we're therefore united with the countries of the world to fight all kinds of terrorism. Terrorism is never an appropriate or justified response just because of political difficulties. So yes, we are keeping an eye on it. But it speaks to the point that an administration, the United States administration, cannot focus just on one thing. What the war on terrorism has done is it's given us an organizing principle that allows us to think about terrorism, to think about weapons of mass destruction, to think about the links between them, and to form a united front across the world to try and win this war.
Last simple question. If we come forward with sweeping recommendations for change in how our law enforcement and intelligence agencies operate to meet the new challenges of our time, not the 20th century or the 19th century challenges we've faced in the past, and if the President of the United States agrees with them, can you assure us that he will fight with all the vigor he has to get them enacted?
I can assure you that if the President agrees with the recommendations, and I think we'll want to take a hard look at the recommendations, we're going to fight. Because the real lesson of September 11th is that the country was not properly structured to deal with the threat that had been gathering for a long period of time. I think we're better structured today than we ever have been. We've made a lot of progress. But we want to hear what further progress we can make. And because this President considers his highest calling to protect and defend the people of the United States of America, he'll fight for any changes that he feels necessary.
Thank you, Dr. Rice.
Thank you.